Also says 12-team playoff will probably benefit Penn State much any college team. Oh yes, I keep seeing graphics put up that show how many times Penn State would have made the playoffs if it had been a 12-team thing from the start, and there were at least 3 seasons where it would have happened. I think 2016, 2016, 2017, and 2019. Actually, maybe even 2018.
Yeah, because 2018 they were. I mean, obviously things would be a little bit different in a 12-team playoff era, but in 2018, even going 9-3, they still finished 12th in the final college football playoff rankings, and obviously this year they would have been in as well. So, yeah, I mean, I've long said that there may not be any program in the country is going to benefit more from an expanded playoff than Penn State. I mean, I saw if you go back to when the BCS started in what was that 1998, I believe. Penn State, if you had done a 12-team playoff going back to 98, Penn State would have something like 15 playoff appearances already. So there are very few programs who are going to benefit more from it. And I mean, you can look at it a couple of different ways. On one hand, it shows you're one of the best programs in the country. On the other hand, it shows that you're still one of those so close yet so far away kind of programs where you're right on the cusp of taking that next step, consistently on the cusp of taking that next step and just haven't done it. But everything changes when you go to 12 teams. And as we've talked about a bunch today and in recent weeks, even with the 4-team setup next year, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised if we see Penn State break through next year and in the final year of the 4-team playoff get in, because I mean, on one hand, you and I, other Penn State fans, will be surprised because one of those I'll believe when I see it kind of things, because we know things tend to go somehow, some way go wrong. But on the other hand, you have every tool, every piece in place, all the talent needed. So it wouldn't stun me if that happened next year. But without a doubt, when they expand to 12 teams, there may not be a program in the country that will benefit from that more than Penn State.
Oh, absolutely not. And all right, we got a Utah fan in the chat. Go Utes. Remick, feel free to give us your take. Give us other names besides Cam Rising that Penn State fans should know of. I think Cam Rising is probably the one name on Utah that maybe non-Utah fans are aware of, but obviously they got a lot of other good guys in that team if they're having that much success. Let's see. Well, if y'all want to update an Army Navy, there you go.
Yeah, and with Utah, one thing I'll be very intrigued too with the bowl game is now that he's announced he's coming back, do we see Olu Fashanu left tackle for Penn State? Utah has a very good defensive line, and you're going to want all hands on deck to deal with it. I mean, Drew Shelton more than held his own at left tackle, the true freshman who filled in for Fashanu. But when you lose a guy, and it's no knock on Drew Shelton because Drew Shelton could turn into this kind of player one day, but whenever your left tackle is an All-American who was projected to be the first offensive line, potentially the first offensive lineman off the board in April, maybe a top 5 pick, that's just a huge drop off from that kind of caliber player to almost anybody. So that's one thing I'll be very curious to see in the Rose Bowl is, does Penn State, that offensive line that was so banged up at the end of the year, are they healthy? Because if they are, and you can combine the amount of depth they're able to cultivate those few weeks with Drew Shelton, with a JB Nelson, with a Vig Ione, and you can do that while getting your injured players back, that could be big too in this bowl game, because not only are you going to be able to have Fashanu just anchor the line of left tackle, it gives you the ability to kind of rotate guys a little bit, which you don't want to do a ton on the offensive line, but you can do it enough to keep guys fresh, which in the fourth quarter, if you're able to keep your offensive line fresh, that obviously could go a long way, especially, if you're put in a position where, let's say, 5 minutes ago and Utah's punting it back to you and you're up by 4 or 5 and you need to drain the clock and kill it. If you have a fresh offensive line, that becomes a lot easier to do. But yeah, I think that was one thing to watch in the game, is if they're able to get Fashanu back from injury, that goes a long way too, because this Utah defensive line is a very good group. I mean, other than Michigan and Ohio State, probably the best defensive line Penn State will see this year. And Ohio State as a whole, I'm not convinced Ohio State as a whole has a better defensive line than Utah, but Ohio State has the the better player in JT, but as a whole, this Utah defensive line might be better than Ohio State's.